It is not an exaggeration to say that the most famous independent theater is the Moscow Art Theater. By the way, you'll notice throughout this lecture and this unit that I pronounce the name of this city Moscow, not Moscow. Moscow is not correct. Moscow is correct. Please join me in being picky about this correct pronunciation for the rest of your lives. Thank you. Back to the lecture. The Moscow Art Theater is, as I said, arguably the most famous independent theater company to come out of this period in European history, and maybe the most famous theater company in the world in the last 200 years. It's founded by Konstantin Stanislavski and Vladimir Nemrovich Danchenko, two giants of Western theater. Now, I know you know the name Konstantin Stanislavski. You've seen it many times, and you've heard a lot about his ideas in acting. We'll talk about that in another lecture. By the way, please note that I spell his name here with a K. You can spell it with a C equally well. You could put a Y at the end of his name or an I at the end of his name. Neither of these are more or less correct than the other because his name is originally in another alphabet, and so we're just approximating the right sound with these letters, and so no reason to have a particular preference, as far as I know, between the spellings. The other name, Vladimir Nemrovich Danchenko, is I'm sure less familiar to you, but it will soon become quite familiar to you. In fact, why don't you take a moment and say it with me now so you aren't afraid of it. First name, Vladimir. Say it. Good. Second name, two parts, Nemrovich Danchenko. Vladimir Nemrovich Danchenko. And he is not a household name the way Stanislavski is, but he deserves a tremendous credit for what is accomplished at the Moscow Art Theater. This theater is founded in 1897, first produced plays in 1898, so we usually date that as the beginning of the theater, influenced by both the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen's company, whom both these men had seen in performance when they toured, and the work of André Antoine, who they both saw in Paris. There was a lot of traffic between Paris and Moscow in the 19th century, all the way up to the first couple decades of the 20th century until the revolution in Russia. The royal family in Tsarist Russia spoke French in the court, educated people in Moscow, regularly traveled to Paris, spent time in Paris, spoke the language, knew the art that was happening there. So it's not weird at all that there was influence between Paris and Moscow, and therefore between André Antoine and Stanislavski and Nemrovich Danchenko. The theater company, there I just said about the influence of Meininger players and André Antoine. I just said that so you know it. This theater company, the Moscow Art Theater Company, is going to emphasize its production elements, making those modern and new, more than it's going to focus on discovering new playwrights, which is sort of something we see the theater companies in Europe who are independent theaters embracing this idea of discovering new playwrights. For example, J.T. Grundy, the Independent Theater, and their relationship with George Bernard Shaw. But it's not a major priority of Stanislavski or Nemrovich Danchenko when they found this theater. They're more interested in the production elements being modern. That being said, they are going to be instrumental in a major playwright's career, Anton Chekhov. They essentially launch his career. He had some plays produced before he worked with the Moscow Art Theater, but it's nothing compared to what happens to him as a writer once he's associated with this company, and we'll talk about that in the Chekhov lecture to come. First, a couple of words, please, about Stanislavski and Nemrovich Danchenko to help you understand what they're bringing into this endeavor. Here, I did want to mention obviously, that the other big thing besides the creation of a major career as a playwright for Anton Chekhov, the other big contribution that we associate with Moscow Art Theater is Stanislavski's acting system. He will develop a system to describe what good actors do, and he will then use that to form a way to teach acting that is going to revolutionize the art. Which is why you still talk about him in acting classes today. So, yes, Chekhov comes out of the Moscow Art Theater. Yes, Stanislavski's system of acting comes out of the Moscow Art Theater. These are really important. But let's dig down a little bit into who these two guys are and what they were planning to do when they launched this theater. They weren't planning to, discover Chekhov or invent a system for acting. What were they planning to do? Well, I'll tell you. Okay, this is Vladimir Nemirovich Danchenko. He does have fabulous facial hair. He's born in 1858, dies in 1943. His family is high-born. His father has a title, so they're aristocratic. He was very well educated, had a privileged life. He became a writer, a journalist. He also wrote plays. None of them made him made a big impact on the stage, but he did have an early interest in dramatic literature. He started teaching theater and acting in Moscow at a school, like a school of higher education, a university there. He thought that the acting training that he was able to do was limited. He thought that Russian theater was never really going to make a leap forward into something modern, such as what he saw the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen's company or Antoine's company doing, until there was a way to train actors better. So this was on his mind. He thought that the working practices in Russian theaters were old-fashioned. They weren't thinking about rehearsal in modern ways. The average rehearsal preparation period for a play in Moscow professional theater at the time was 3 days. There was almost no such thing as direction or a director. Actors didn't relate to props or scenery in believable ways. He found it all just real old school, old fashioned, and he had seen better stuff, and he wanted to figure out how to bring that not only to his students personally, but also to patrons in professional theater in Moscow.